think it's important to say that when UNRISD started its very broad inquiry into the role of social policy for development, it became quickly clear that the financing issue was something that had been neglected in these debates. Because usually discussions and studies on social protection focus very much on social expenditures, but less so on the funding side of social development and social policies. And so what we tried to do in a broader project on financing social policy was really to see both sides of social policy in an integrated way, the funding side and the expenditure side. And our main question was really how governments could design social policies which are progressive and equitable and developmental, but at the same time which are based on financial arrangements that pursue these same goals. When we started this inquiry, it became quickly clear that there's a specific set of countries, and these are the mineral-rich countries, which are a very interesting subset of countries when we talk about financing social policies. So we developed a sub-project within this broader research on financing social policy in mineral-rich countries. And this is the project where I want to talk about today. And I think the big puzzle that emerges when one talks about, let's say, the potential for social development in mineral-rich countries is that many of these countries continue to be poor, low-income countries with a lot of characterized by a lot of social and economic development problems. And whereas on the one hand we have enthusiasm about the potential that mineral revenues bring for social development, on the other hand there is quite a big amount of skepticism, and this skepticism has been labeled as the paradox of plenty. So the question is whether mineral-led development is a specifically, let's say, difficult or challenging growth path for late industrializers. And I think a lot of this debate is shaped by what has been labeled the so-called resource curse thesis. Which is a more scholarly work, actually based on empirical econometric studies, showing that there is a supposed negative relationship between natural resource abundance or dependence and growth performance. And this work has very much dominated policy, but also theoretical debates on mineral-rich countries in the recent past, or since the 1990s, I would say. However, there has been a lot of criticism on this literature, and I won't go into details about this criticism, which related to methodological issues, but more to the very deterministic conclusions of this literature, where basically it was said that we find, or this negative correlation can be found, and behind this empirical correlations are actually causal relationships. So these very much pessimistic prospects have been criticized, but also have kind of triggered a very rich and new debate on the potential of mineral wealth for development. And this is what drove our research. Basically the question, what are the specific challenges associated with mineral-led development? What are potential constraints? But more importantly, what are the opportunities? And what are the conditions under which mineral-rich countries can actually channel more of their revenues into social development, and how they can actually come closer to a positive development outcomes? So what was very interesting about this theoretical inquiry about development in mineral-rich contexts is a very succinct and substantive investigation about the different challenges of mineral-led wealth, and which is of course not something that is new, but that has shaped development economics since its inception, I would say. But let me just very briefly summarize, just in keywords, these development challenges, which I have divided into economic, political, social, and environmental challenges, before I come to the more interesting, I think, findings and implications of our research, how social policy actually can have a positive impact with regard to these different challenges. So first of all, we have economic challenges in a context of mineral-led development, which are usually described by Dutch disease, which is, of course, the challenge that emerges when countries have a lot of foreign exchange inflows because of exports and have to cope or manage the macroeconomic and currency, the inflationary and currency appreciation pressures in order to avoid detrimental effects on the manufacturing or other sectors in the economy. Other challenges are related to the enclave nature. So if the most dynamic sector of an economy is actually an enclave, the question comes up how to diversify that economy and how to create actually linkages that offer more employment possibilities and more productive opportunities for other sectors in the economy as well. There are also a lot of political challenges, and this, I think, relates to the simple fact that who captures rents from extractive industries, and how are these rents actually allocated or distributed. So there is a whole literature actually on these questions, and whether one can relate specific rent-seeking activities, corruption, distributional conflicts, or even the financing of violent conflicts to the existence of natural resource abundance in countries. There are also a lot of social challenges associated with mineral-led development, and I just want to emphasize the impact of mineral-led development on inequalities. It can be shown that, let's say, the concentration of economic activities and of let's say, if the most dynamic economic sector is an enclave sector like mining, this usually adds to income inequalities, regional inequalities, but also in a way to gender inequalities in a country. So we have these social challenges in terms of inequalities, which are already significant in many developing countries, but tend to be even more pronounced in mineral-rich contexts. And last but not least, the environmental challenges, the ecological cost associated with extractive industries. This is something probably that receives one of the most attention in global debates, and this is something also where most of the social mobilization actually occurs from the ground. The discussion about depletion of resources, pollution and destruction of the environment, and also new challenges that come up now with climate change and green economy debates. Now, nevertheless, despite all these challenges, we can identify what is also a fact, and this is probably also the good news, is that in many countries, and not to say in most of the developing countries that have experienced high growth rates more recently, actually the natural resource-based sectors are the driving sectors behind that. And this can be explained by a lot of factors, but one is, of course, quite a favorable, still volatile, but favorable environment globally in terms of demand and prices, new incentives for investments, some of which, for example, emerged in the context of the global crisis in terms of increased portfolio investments, also in commodity or financial commodity markets, but also more incentives for foreign direct investment, new technologies, of course, a certain path dependency for many developing countries, which have started off their growth models based on natural resources, but also, and this is maybe interesting and also explains some of the concerns many countries have, as Peter explained, the impact of the more recent globalization processes and neoliberal policies, where actually a lot of countries find that they reorient their economies towards comparative advantages because they have become less competitive in their more manufacturing sectors. So this is what in Latin America is discussed as reprimarization. Now, the concern of many countries, especially more the middle-income countries, which experienced commodity booms more recently, but also for the low-income countries that put a lot of hopes, let's say, in the potential of mineral-led development, is that there are long-term objectives, of course. So mineral-led development can be a positive development strategy if it combines stability and sustainability, diversification, eventually leading to more productive diversification linkages, value-added, more qualified employment, and inclusive and democratic development. Now, one of the key questions we pursued in this research project is actually, given that context, and given these multiple challenges mineral-rich countries face, what is the role that social policy can play in this process? And I think that the role of social policy for mineral-led development has been neglected or underestimated due to two reasons. On the one hand, especially the resource curse literature, but traditionally the economic development literature for resource-rich countries has focused on challenges of macroeconomic stabilization and on good governance. So social policy was usually not part of this debate. And second, when social policy came into the picture, it was usually interpreted as a threat to this macroeconomic stability, and it was seen as an instrument that especially what is also labeled predatory or the undemocratic regimes have tended to use in order to perpetuate their regime. So what is also called populist or redistributive regimes. So in a way, social policy was or absent, or when it was brought into the debate, it was seen very critical. And I think what we show in this book and in this research is actually that social policy can indeed be a very forceful and very powerful instrument, especially to tackle the challenges that mineral-rich countries face. Now, how can this be done? And I have to go through this very quickly in order not to go beyond our time limit. But social policy investments have a very beneficial impact in terms of growth and sustainability. Just one example in this sense. It has come out that it is very difficult to diversify an economy through so-called fiscal linkages, because the problems that governments had was to identify the sector that would be the best, let's say, sector to invest part of the revenues in order to diversify the economy. If proceeds from the mineral or extractive industries are invested in social policy, and this leads to, let's say, creation of a knowledge economy, to higher quality education, to skills training, etc., then this adds really to the future economic potential of the economy in its whole. And it is not. It's a lot easier than to decide to allocate these resources to specific economic sectors. Stability and social protection. Of course, it is possible to combine the productive and the protective goals of social policy, and this is especially beneficial in resource-rich countries. And I think Chile and Norway are good examples where they have actually created funds that serve at the same time as stabilization and reserve funds, and on the other hand, for example, as pension funds. Employment. Norway is a very good example to show that there has been some sort of Dutch disease effects in the countries, and employment in manufacturing has actually declined since Norway has discovered oil. But at the same time, they have expanded employment in the social sectors very strongly, which has partly compensated for the decline in employment in the manufacturing sector. And this is also something that has actually reduced the gender bias that is so often inherent in mineral-led development, because especially investment in the social sectors offers opportunity for women in relatively stable and protected public employment. Social policy is also very important, and this is often underestimated, in order to create or foster social inclusion and cohesion in countries that are often struggling, actually, to forge these strong citizen-state relations. And this level of trust, which is also beneficial for investor confidence and the general economic environment. And last but not least, political legitimacy, especially if countries are able to set up rights-based and universal social policies. This is really an instrument where they can avoid being perceived as populist or predatory regimes that capture rents for the private interest. And this does not only improve, let's say, social cohesion and state-citizen relations, but also can have a beneficial impact on growth and even donor relations. So this is the main message I would like to put out here and would like to discuss with you. And of course, we in the research we also have a couple of other recommendations which are more geared towards the institutional and economic policies and sector strategies and also the global environment. But I'm sure that Samuel and Alfredo will also refer to these conditions, so we can discuss this later. Just to finalize, and without going into the very rich country case studies which are in the book, I think some of the lessons we took out from, especially the case studies, is, and which can also contribute to this debate on the resource curse, is first, the country context, and also including the global context, is more important than resource abundance. So it is really not about what countries have, but what they make out of it. Secondly, mineral-led development has specific challenges that need to be addressed. So it is also true that even the successful cases have to struggle with the specific challenges an oil economy or a mineral-rich economy poses. So there needs to be a kind of really purposeful and deliberate strategy that tackles these challenges. And last but not least, I think the big challenge is really the balancing of economic and social goals and the governance and institutional setup that really enables countries to take advantage of the rents and to distribute them to the wider population, and at the same time to safeguard the stability in political and economic terms that is needed to turn this opportunity into a long-term development strategy.